As I mentioned, I'll be polling throughout the session, so please, when you get a chance, fill out the poll. And for today, we have John Towsley, who is the CEO of MindMuse. And the topic is performance support, transform your service desk to a learning desk. And a quick little bio on John. John has extensive experience in IT and the IT education marketplace. He began his career at Nabisco Brands in IT, then established and ran his own multi-site IT education and consulting business in Canada and the United States. John has served on CompTIA's A+ and Network Plus advisory councils and is ITIL certified. He graduated from the Richard Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario with his honors Bachelor of Business Administration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to actually, John, I guess I'll close out this poll. I think we've had a number of people that have participated. We've had over 70% who have voted already, so I'm going to close out this poll and turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rick, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So as advertised, we're going to talk today about performance support and how we can transform your service desk into a learning desk. So today's subject matter is really the connection between learning, training, and the service desk, and how those two things can be married together using some different techniques and perhaps some technology. So we'll launch ahead. I see half of you figured, 75% of what you need to know is in your noodle, and 33% or 50%, sorry, 33% said that half of what you need to know to do your job you have stored in your mind. So let's just take a look at what the research says after our survey. Oh, Rick, you need to close the poll there. Oh, he did. Okay, thanks. There we go. So this research comes from Carnegie Mellon University, and if we were back in 1986, the majority of you would be correct. Most employees retained in their current sort of knowledge base, if you will, in their brain 75% of what they needed to know to perform their job. By 1996, that had dropped to 20%. By 2006, down to 10%. And I suspect is either flat or falling from there. And I think the primary driver for that, as you might guess, is the world that we live in is changing ever so fast. The amount of codified knowledge in the world is increasing exponentially. So what that means is the stuff that people have written down that you might want to know or need to know to perform your job is growing exponentially. And so it becomes impossible to retain that. Both my kids just finished university and graduated as engineers, and they were both told pretty clearly near the end of their tenure at the university that 90% of what they learned would be obsolete by the time they got to the end of their first year of working at their new careers, which at first was disheartening, but that's really the point of today's presentation is to talk about how we address that issue, and in particular how that relates back to what you might be able to do on your service desk. So the truth about knowledge retention, and I think you probably see this in the service desk world. One of my first experiences on what was then a help desk and then a service desk, is the common phrase RTFM, read the friggin' manual, was the standard response to or the response you wanted to give to customers or clients who were calling in and asking questions. And the reality is that quite often the calls that we're getting we wouldn't get if somebody was either trained or B, had retained what they had been taught in the training class. The reason that you see that, and it drives frustration, I think, sometimes on service desks, is if you look at this chart, we know, and it's been well documented for many years in the training and learning industry, that within 48 hours after a training event, you've forgotten 70-some or 67% of what you were taught. So you have an awareness of what's possible. I mean, if you think about the simplest examples of Microsoft Office training or an application training session for one of your internal applications. The reality is, if you think back to that last slide and the amount of information that's being bombarded, we just can't retain that knowledge. There's only so much that fits in your noodle. And further, because of the technologies that exist today, smartphones and whatever else, our users, clients expect that they'll be able to find the answer when they need it. The default, as you might imagine, in terms of how I want to find the answer, is that I'll just call the service desk. So what we're looking at today is how we can use performance support to actually drive up that retention. And so post-training, what is it that we can do that will increase the client or user's performance by providing that information to them? Because we know that they've forgotten 67% within 2 days of the training. So Rick's opened a poll here, and just wanted to get a sort of feeling for today's audience and see how many people have implemented any of this. So it looks like we're running at about 80% no, so very good. Go ahead and close that, Rick. That's good. So hopefully you'll learn something today, and we'd be happy to do any follow-up with questions through this presentation or after the presentation. So this research comes from one of our business partners. So MindMuse does work in this particular section or sector of the industry. It's one of the connections between the BWise group of companies, MindMuse as a learning provider and developer of training programs. It has created some expertise in the area of performance support because we see it quite often as a best fit. And personally, having experience in the help desk world, it didn't take me long to realize that there's this very, very strong connection, and in fact something that I wanted to do, I'll date myself, 20 or 25 years ago and just couldn't because of the technology and costs, is now possible, I think, in a lot of organizations. So this research comes from our business partner. I won't steal the thunder. These aren't my ideas, but I'd be happy to share further details later. What they did is identify the 5 moments of need. And the first 2 are really the things that we're used to thinking about. So when I'm learning something for the first time or when I want to learn more, and that's usually addressed by traditional learning. And by traditional learning, I mean classroom training, more frequently now webinars, and potentially e-learning. But it's got kind of linear, here's the outline for the class, whether it's live training or it's, some form of synchronous training, or it's self-study, i.e. asynchronous training, or it's even read a book. When I want to learn more traditionally, I would go to that source, or when I'm trying to figure something out for the first time. So hearkening back to that last slide, what I need is to address the other 3 moments of need. So when I'm trying to apply or remember what you told me. So I know there's a way to analyze data in Excel, for a simple example. Or I know there's a way to embed a graphic in Excel and have the text wrap around it because you showed me in class where I read it. But that was more than 48 hours ago, and in fact it might have been a month ago. And I need to do that right now, and as you know, in the help desk industry, by and large, when I say I need to know right now, it means because I didn't get to this and I've got to have this report or this presentation prepared by 5 o'clock this evening, and it's 3:45 now. The other 2 moments, when something goes wrong, which, tends to be when we're all running around with our hair on fire because there's some form of a crisis, or our clients are, and I need to know right now, I'm trying to fix this. Another silly example, I'm trying to print something and the pagination's not working, or the footers aren't printing, or I can't get it to print on 2 sides, or whatever that is, but I need it now, generally. Or when something changes. So, other simple examples, maybe our organization changes the way that we are going to track and report expense reports at the end of the month. So there's a new form here I have to fill out, and now I'm doing that, in Excel, or, I'm doing it in a PDF document or something. So I learned the first time how to do this, perform this task, but now we've changed something. We changed the technology, or we changed the process or the procedure or the steps. and I'm not going to go back to class to learn how to do the new one, but I do need somebody to tell me what's new and how do I change it now. And we've seen that kind of stuff going on for a number of years. If you think about, once again, simple examples, every time there's a new version of Microsoft Office, some things change, and arguably for the better. But every now and then, you'll go and look for something and you'll say, gee, that button used to be here and I don't know where it is now. I can't find it. So that's a pretty simple example. So those are the 5 moments of need. And we'll talk a little bit about how they impact and affect the service desk. But pretty clearly, when you're looking at those last 3, that's when your phone rings or you get an email or however, a chat session coming into the service desk. Give me 1 sec here. There we are. So if we think about this in terms of a diagram, that moment of need is what we're trying to address. And traditionally what we've done is we started at the top of this pyramid and said, well, I'll figure out and anticipate what people need to know to do their jobs. In the learning and training world, we talk about skills and competencies, and I'm sure most of you have been exposed to those kind of terms. So what are the skills or competencies that somebody needs to have if you think about rolling out a new application? And we set that, and we work with the training folks, and we develop some conceptual sort of, flow charts. Here's how you put a work order into the system. Then we go into deeper detail, and we say, here's the screens, and here's how you log in, and here's what all the fields mean and how you navigate through the application, and then we'll detail the steps. So let's put one in, and typically, as you might guess, in most training situations, it'll be show me and then step me through it and then let me try it or test me. And that's how we typically and historically address those training needs, and there's a large industry that continues to do that, a multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. Then if you think about the other 3 moments of need, when I need to do this thing, then also historically what we said is, well, if you can't remember when you need to do it, I'll give you some resources to help you. So you can dust off the training manual at Surlocks bound that we gave you at the training class and look at the table of contents or the index and try to find what you need to do that. If it's software, maybe you'll try and go to the vendor's help. And I'm sure you've all heard it, right? But the knock on the vendor's help, which your cousin and your grandmother will tell you at Christmas, is that whatever they're trying to find is not what the software manufacturer calls it, so they can never find it. Or I could potentially go back to an e-learning program. We're in the e-learning business, and frankly, it's great for those first 2 moments of need. But we typically build e-learning modules in 20 to 30 to 60 minute packages. And if what I need to know is how to do a pivot table, take a stupid example again, then I'm not going to log into the learning management system, find the course that had that content, go into the course, navigate through the menu, get to that module and do an example. So what am I going to do? We all know it in the help desk world painfully well. I'm going to call the help desk, actually. I might also ask a friend that maybe the first lifeline that I use is where I just lean over the cubicle, talk to the person next to me, text or ping somebody I know on Skype or whatever the internal tools are. So the concept with performance support is that we're going to turn that upside down. So we'll document the steps, and here they're referred to as sidekicks. So, think about job aids is one way that historically those have been addressed. But if I need to do something right now, probably what I want is just what are the steps I have to go through, just show me. It may be that I need a little more detail on that because it's still not clear to me. I need to understand how the fields are defined or what the different fields mean. And it's possible, if you think about a simple example, Microsoft has tried to do this in some of their help in the office applications. I might want you to show me. So show me an example of how that happens. So how do I embed a graph? Oh, I see how you do that because it wasn't clear to me. And then it could be that through that process I realize, you know what, I need to understand this at a broader level. I need to understand why I'm doing this. You know, maybe I want to talk to some other people, and the acronym on the screen there, COP, stands for Communities of Practice. So it may be that I want to connect to some other people who are also doing this. Let's say it's project management. Then I might want to connect with other project managers and see what they're doing. So we kind of turn that upside down using performance management and try to deliver to the individual exactly the content that they need to accomplish the tasks that they're trying to accomplish at that moment of need. So let's just take a little bit closer look at what that framework looks like. So basically, as you drive down, you're saying, well, talk to me about the process. So I might want to overlay what the business process is. Once again, simple example, I'm trying to fill out an expense report or complete a work order. So what are the steps in completing that work order? I want to provide some quick reference to that. And then I want to get down further and show me the details. So what is the definition, or if I pick this value for a field, what will the impact of that be? So how do I know which value to pick? And then once again, I may want to provide some examples. And then at the bottom of that, there are all kinds of resources, you know, simulations, exercises, links, and potentially those community kind of things where I could chat with other people who have done this if I need more clarification. So that's the framework that we want to implement. And I think, as you can imagine, what we're doing here, if we leverage technology, is keeping things current. And I'll show you how that fits into the model. So this isn't particularly new necessarily. What's new is our ability to deliver this in real time and to deliver current content. So if you think historically, you've probably seen or used laminated you know, job aids or printed job aids for things like Microsoft Office or some of your internal applications or processes. The challenge is, in large organizations especially, how do I keep that fresh? So, you know, applications are being updated and modified and changed all the time. Our internal processes are changing and modifying all the time. You know, I don't know if somebody in their cubicle has the, you know, job aid from 5 years ago that they photocopied kind of crooked 12 times and handed to every new employee that came in. And the reality is most of us just haven't got the mechanisms to stay on top of that, let alone the budget and wherewithal. So what we're trying to do with modern performance support solutions is address that issue of currency and relevancy in a cost-effective manner that is something that we can manage. Oops, sorry, I skipped ahead one. Too heavy on my mouse clicks. So business value from performance support, obviously any initiative, you know, you're going to be asked to justify. And these are, at the business level, the kind of areas we hope to impact and generate a return on whatever investment you might make. At the top of the list, the help desk and call center efficiency. So we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute, but essentially what we're saying is, you know, if a percentage of the calls that I get are primarily driven because the client or customer calling is lacking a particular skill or competency, just doesn't know how to do something, and they might have been taught it or shown it before, they just can't remember, then I can address that and drive the number of calls down. What that does, obviously, on the help desk is allow us to invest our labor resources in things that will further increase productivity and drive benefit back to the organization. In some cases, it might be that, you know, you've got outsourced overflow, that kind of stuff, and you'd see real tangible dollar savings by reducing those calls. So sales productivity, another one, you know, I won't touch too much on the other ones today because primarily we're talking about service desks, but as IT professionals, certainly you probably get connected to some of these other potential benefits. especially when you're rolling out new applications or there's a business process change. Without question, from a help desk perspective, business process changes typically will drive call volumes because they tend to be related to the supporting applications. Same with onboarding of new employees, right? I'm sure there's a whole package of things that most service desks do when a new employee is being onboarded, and without question we've seen from our customers, both in our ThoughtRock practice and in our MindMuse practice, that that's a big issue. When somebody comes on board, how do they learn all of the things they need to know, to get access to systems, to use those systems, to be compliant with IT security requirements and all those kind of things. So performance support can play a big role because obviously in the absence of training, or training that is only classroom driven and therefore within 48 hours they're not retaining all of it, the call volumes and contacts to the service desk definitely go up. So Rick, did we have a poll here? Yeah, there we go. So just a kind of a quick question, the way you work today, when somebody calls a support desk, is there a link back to training? What happens? And think about that as we go forward. So we'll just give you guys a couple minutes to complete that. Okay, so pretty encouraging at this point. Majority of you are saying yes, there is a link back, which is great. And I think once you've seen some of the other things we're going to talk about here and some of the examples, hopefully for those of you who aren't doing it, you'll see the benefit to doing that sort of 40% of you. And for the 60% who are doing this, maybe you'll see some new and interesting techniques for doing it more consistently, more cost effectively. So great. Thanks for answering that. So as it pertains to the service desk, what I'd like to talk about is kind of this knowledge life cycle. And this is a kind of a concept that we think about when we work with our customers. So in the center of this life cycle, I kind of have performance support. And the easiest way to think about that, I'll show another diagram in a second, but if we're IT folks, think about that as a knowledge base, essentially. So I'm going to gather, store, and or consolidate, the knowledge that exists in the organization that is required to provide training to the employees, either who are currently on the job or new employees coming in, or when people need refreshing. So the first thing in this life cycle is I may have, especially if you're thinking about those first two moments of need, when somebody needs to know something for the first time or needs to learn more, I may have some prerequisite training. And typically that's where we see the fit for what we call asynchronous training, that is self-study. Most organizations today are embracing the concept of e-learning to provide that training. There's a fairly large industry. It could also be simply self-study using PDF documents or something as simple as a narrated or a non-narrated PowerPoint slide. Whatever that looks like, there is certain content that I can deliver to somebody before they attend that synchronous event, so the webinar or the classroom. And the objective there is to do two things. One is to drive up that retention. So in the learning industry, we do know that the number of times you tell or show somebody something, that the higher probability that they'll retain the pieces they know to do their job. And the second thing is, in all organizations, people are looking at ways to drive down the cost of delivering training and minimize the amount of face-to-face and classroom training that they need to do, or at least maximize the return on that. So rather than do things in the classroom that could have been done in self-study, I want to use the classroom time for maximum benefit because it's expensive in terms of real estate. If it's technical training, it may be expensive in terms of hardware and classroom facilities. In a lot of organizations, travel's been taboo for quite a few years now, and if I have geographically dispersed employees, then that's also a fairly large cost. So the concept using performance support is that prerequisite training I'm basically going to suck out of that performance support system. Because remember, if I've done the work to try and gather, manage, and keep current that central content, that is the knowledge that people need to perform their jobs, then I can go there to get it. It makes the life and work of a training and organization, either internally or externally, much simpler. Because I can tell you the content collection and gathering is a huge time and cost in the creation of training. So when organizations have their act together, it really, really helps to have a central authenticated source of that knowledge. So the next thing that happens is I may still want to do classroom or webinar, some kind of a synchronous training application. The difference, if I'm leveraging performance support, is that in that classroom or webinar, and you'll see the connection to the service desk in a second, what I'm doing, I've driven down the time that I need to spend in the classroom, and I'm actually leveraging the performance support system. So rather than print out a static manual, chop down a bunch of trees, hand it out, and then have it collect dust in everybody's cubicle until we do an office shuffle and they move and throw it out. That sounds a bit facetious, but I see it all the time. Think about your own experiences, and I think you'll, if you're sitting at your computer right now and you reach into your right hand or left hand drawer, my guess is you have one or more of those manuals at the back there somewhere, or up on your bookshelf that you haven't cracked, since you took the course or shortly thereafter. It's just the reality of the way that we learn and work as humans. So the concept here is that I've had some prerequisite training in the classroom. What I'm going to do, I'm going to teach you how to learn. So we'll go through some hands-on activities so that as a facilitator I can answer questions and clarify things, make sure you know how to do it. But I'm not going through the whys and the flow charts and the conceptual things that you could have studied before class. I'm going to actually make you do that before you get here. And there are techniques your learning and training department will have to do that. By and large, most organizations have some form of a learning management system in place. So I can tell you got to take the course. I can track that you did it. I might do an assessment as a prerequisite. In some cases, quite often actually with respect to rolling out IT service management training, we'll have prerequisites and you can't come to class unless you finished. So in the classroom, I'm spending time showing you where to get the knowledge, because I know that after class you're going to forget some of this stuff, but I'm going to show you where to get the answers easily and quickly, which is what I want if I'm an employee. So then I go back to my desk and I'm trying to apply this knowledge, and hopefully what I'm doing then is interacting with the performance support system, because I remember that you showed me how to get there. And performance support systems that are worth their salt, if you think about application training, are linked to the application. So somewhere on the toolbar, I've learned I can click a button and it will take me to not only the performance support system, but ideally in a context-sensitive way. It's context-sensitive help, essentially. It'll take me right to the information about the form I'm trying to fill out or the process I'm trying to conduct. Even if it's not application training, sorry, I've got the word application twice, if it's not systems application training, but process training, when I'm trying to apply that knowledge, there are ways to present that. So I might come at it from a process flow perspective and say, well, here I am, I'm a nurse and I'm trying to check somebody in to my floor, and gee, I'm new on the job, or there's a particular nuance to this person or this situation. I can look at the process flow and say, yeah, I'm right here, click on that and get the relevant help. So what you'll still get is some connection back to the learning desk or the service desk, and this is why we asked that poll question. So ideally, what you want to do, and I think it's just much easier when you've implemented these kinds of solutions, is I'm going to, as an analyst on the desk, politely connect the user back to the performance support system. So I'll answer your question. Oh, by the way, did you know? You can get that answer by clicking on this button, and it'll take you to the right place. So next time, you may not do this for another 3 months. If you try that, you won't have to call me and wait in the queue or whatever. So there's some what's in it for me and some customer service approach to doing that, obviously. The reason that arrow goes back and forth is there's a connection and a role now and responsibility on the learning desk. So it could be that I'm getting a lot of calls about the same thing. When I look at the performance support system and or look at the training, what I recognize is that the information is not correct. So you do need a process flow here that says, well, if we're getting a bunch of calls, let's update the performance support system and let's update that prerequisite in classroom training to drive that skill set or that knowledge into our clients and then further reduce the calls to the support desk. So when I talk about creating a learning desk, that's really what I'm talking about, is how do we consistently, in cases where our clients are calling and it's not, hey, this broke, it's how do I, we are consistently managing those calls. We're hopefully following best practice, so with categorizing and tracking, we're looking at our call reports and then working with our training departments and or our IT training folks and saying, hey, you know what, if we update the knowledge base, the performance support system, and update the training, we can have an impact and drive costs down. So let's take another look at the graphics in terms of how this looks. So really, if time equals 0 here, what I'm trying to remember, something goes wrong or something changes, those other 3 moments of need, the last 3. And typically, if you think about it from a support desk perspective, this is what's happening, right? So I'm here, I have some kind of interface. I might be an ERP system, the CRM system, some enterprise application. I could be mobile, right? I might be on a tablet or a smartphone. And the one on the far right, the web portal, just might indicate, in this case, that I know there is a central portal that I can go to learn things. Most organizations have or are working on implementing that kind of concept. So there I am as the learner. I need to know something. And what we want to do in the performance support implementation is really say, I need to understand who you are, what your role is, what the workflow is, and sort of what the system state is. And then I'm going to broker the content that you're going to get based on all of that information. So there's Johnny up there. I need to know how to do this right now. I'm connecting either to the system through one of these applications or through a portal. It might be that it's a business process that I need to figure out, or it may be just something as simple as I said, trying to figure out how to fill up my expense report in Excel or whatever. So the concept here is that I have existing learning assets, I may have new learning assets, and what we want to do through performance support is deliver the most appropriate asset back to that user, and we want to do that really quickly. So you're really talking about just-in-time training, and it is at that moment of need. Because if you think about it conceptually at your service desk today, this is what you're doing in a number of instances. It's just that you have a lot of human intervention in there. So you essentially have somebody calling you and saying, hey, I'm trying to do this. You have trained your agents or analysts, and they're the ones who are acting as the broker, and they're going through and trying to look in your knowledge base or based on their own experience. And remember, they can only keep 10% of that in their noodle these days. They're trying to figure out, what does this person need to know, and hopefully getting them the right answer. So we're really looking at automating some of that and trying to make it more reliable. So let's look
John,
at
just want to do a quick
couple
time
case
check.
studies.
It's 12.
Sure.
Yeah, just want to do a quick time check, 12:37. And again, to let everybody know, if you want to ask questions, you can post them on the fly here, and we'll otherwise we'll address the questions at the end. But just want to do a quick time check there.
Thanks very much. So we'll show a couple of examples and case studies here, just so you get a sense of how this can be done, and then I'll wrap up in just a few minutes. So in this case, it's actually a help desk example, global systems integrator, 13,500 employees, all supported by a single desk. And lots of business challenges, right? 1,000+ end users every year onboarding. Lots, as most of us see, new application system upgrades. And, you know, the pressure that we typically see coming from that is help desk costs are rising, and we're getting higher call volumes and longer duration calls. So in their case, the solution was a couple of things. One, to implement some standard content for Microsoft Office. And baseline content. The difference in terms of terminology there, standard content is just, you know, in a nutshell, better help than comes with Office. Baseline content is actually something a little different. That content is generic and then can be leveraged and modified and customized to suit your environment. So quite often you'll see in things like SharePoint applications, less so in Office, that you've created some internal applications or nuances about how things flow. And then support and solutions for remote workers and their processes, and internal operational documentations for HR, document management, and their ERP systems. So not just technology-based solutions, but also business-based solutions. So the kind of thing that you see, the way this performance support system that we use works is it doesn't track individual statistics, but you can track usage. So what you're seeing is a tremendous number of hits on that knowledge base because people were taught how to use it and very quickly realized that it was probably the best and quickest source of answers. So results, you know, year-over-year reduction in call volume by 12.5%. That's 10,000 plus calls, while onboarding employees. Call durations for standard call types reduced significantly. That wasn't specifically measured in this case. When rolling out Office 2010, reduce the number of FTEs to do that. So I think typically you probably see this when you do a rollout, you bring in some contract resources or consultants, or you know, hire some part-timers, right, to help fill that that void. And so that was dramatically impacted. And also, as I mentioned, one of the objectives here, you reduce the amount of time in the classroom. So quite successful, not just initially, but also ongoing. So, you know, if you do the calculations, and not all of these are hard dollars, but you see some pretty significant dollar savings. Now, this is a very large organization, so the numbers are big, but they would be relative, certainly in smaller situations. So, another quick example, healthcare provider in the U.S. Insures tons and tons of people, 30,000 employees. So the challenge here is customer relationship management. Most organizations have some implementation of that. You know, Salesforce is one of the most successful and largest growing software as a service applications. So that actually is the case here. They were using Salesforce. And the way this works, once again, is there's baseline content that is sort of the generic help for Salesforce, but that can be modified because, as you probably have experienced in any CRM system, there's a lot of customization to make the business transaction and workflows relevant to a particular organization. So it's interesting that we all put it in clients, but this is the way we log clients, and we have custom fields to define what type of client, and we have particular processes around what happens, you know, when the client status changes from one thing to another. So a lot of customization in those systems. And the concept here is that you take that base content, so just imagine taking the help files and then modifying them very quickly and easily to match your business's need. And the cool thing here is, as we talked about, you know, when things change is a moment of need. And even in our small organization, we're constantly modifying our Salesforce best practices and process flows to get more information for management, and also to make our employees more productive. So things are constantly changing, and performance support allows us to update that and make sure that it's relevant and it's delivered. Anytime somebody needs to know how do I, they're going to get the accurate information, not the information they got when they were first hired or the last time they had the time to get a training class or somebody showed them. So in this case, you see some significant savings in terms of productivity increases and hours saved per week and so on. So I'll just really quickly show you what this stuff looks like. Here's Salesforce, and what you see is a button or a tab on the Salesforce application, and then help, but help specific to our organization. In this particular case, the solution we use, that help can be set to so that it remains on top, so that as I step through what I'm trying to accomplish, not only am I getting information that's specific to my organization, it stays on top so I can see it as I perform the task. So once again, if you compare that to you know, taking an e-learning class or a classroom training course 2 months ago or even 3 weeks ago, I've forgotten most of that stuff, and as I said, I'm pretty unlikely to go back and read the book or run through the e-learning course again. I'm much more likely to call the help desk or ask a buddy, and performance support can drive down the cost of both of those things. Just a quick example of how this can be done from a business flow perspective. So here I see the business flow. I might go to a web portal. I look at the diagram of the flow. I see what stage I'm on. I can drill down. It's much like a website or a wiki. This is, you can cross-link things. And I can even link this back to, if I want to, assets like Captivate videos or e-learning applications that have been written. You know, any kind of other kinds of learning assets can be cross-linked. So that's it for me. Don't know if there are any questions or comments. Be happy to take those at this point.
Great, thanks, John. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, just again, we've got a few more minutes here, so if anybody wants to post some questions, that'd be great. I think there is one question here. I don't know, John, if you've got any, again, research on it or ideas in terms of next steps. It's kind of about the business impact. So I don't know if this has been asked before, but what is the impact on the business of not providing a performance support tool? So it's, you know, any thoughts on assessing what that business impact is? And I guess, you used a couple examples of, I think, a global outsourcer, but I mean, any other thoughts on taking those steps to, put a real business analysis or ROI behind it?
Sure. Yeah, and we actually have some documents that can help with that. But the impact of not doing this, the most relevant to this call would be, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, is when you have new employee onboarding or you're rolling out new applications or new business processes, you are going to see increased demands and costs on the service desk. And how those get met is different in different organizations. So quite often it's we'll have a project budget and we'll pad the project budget with training and or external support, or part-time people or consultants who will come in and support that rollout. In the case, I think the example we used here was a difference between having 10 people and 2 people on that implementation. The other option is that you don't do this and you don't increase that. The impact there is twofold. One is your service desk gets a bad reputation because your service levels drop. And two is, which is more expensive and the impact on the business, is that employees are less productive longer. So in I think other Thought Rock sessions, I know I sat in on a session Tim did, I think, on asset velocity. And that's the concept of how fast do your employees go from 0 to being the rate of productivity that you want in performing specific tasks. And if you don't do this, what happens is that length of time is increased and therefore the costs go up.
Great. Okay, and while we're waiting for some other questions, just a couple things again for next week. I just wanted to let everyone know that again we have Graham Furness back, who's a senior consultant at Thought Rock, and again just a quick update on what Graham will be talking about. The concept of testing is well known, but what about the validation and evaluation? What are these? Where do they fit in? How do they integrate and flow? So Graham's going to be focusing next week on the presentation that introduces these service transition concepts and associated processes. So please join us again next Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or pass that along to a colleague if that's a topic that would be more interest to somebody in your organization. John, anything else in closing around performance support? I mean, any thoughts from an experience perspective on easiest kind of quick win areas to think about performance support in terms of where you'd see the largest impact and what you've seen? Because it seems quite obvious that when you compare a lot of what you're talking about to the traditional classroom, I mean, the cost of the classroom and then the results are fairly negligent compared to this. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, one of the keys is whenever I see that someone's going to roll out a new application or make substantial changes to an application, one of the examples we used here was Salesforce. So those are places where historically what organizations have done is they've built e-learning or classroom training, and it's very step-by-step kind of, here's what you do, step one, fill this in, and typically it is, we'll tell you why, and then we'll show you why, and then we'll let you practice it. I've seen the same thing with SAP and with Salesforce. The reality is that it's A, a bit mind-numbing, and B, a bit overwhelming. So even going back to my roots doing application training, and we'd bring people into the classroom for a full day, and literally for 6 hours of that day, show them all the features, if you will, and step them through all the things that you can do in Word or Excel, within the parameters of that one day of training. And the reality is that by the end of the day, you're just overwhelmed. And the second piece of that is it's not context sensitive or relative. So it's very difficult to create training courses that are going to have relevant examples, so the examples tend to be very generic. So what performance support does is allow you to be very specific. I know who you are if the performance support tool is worth its salt. I know that you're in this application, and I know what you're trying to do, and it could be even role specific. So take a silly example, but based on who you are and what division you're in, I know which expense report you need to fill out, and it's relevant to what you're trying to do right now. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are I think the simplest ones to knock off. The second ones would be things like process flow. So I come in, I'm learning a new job. There may be a fairly complex process that involves multiple roles. Take the hospital example. My role right now, I might have got a new job and I'm doing intakes, in the emergency ward or whatever. And one way to address that is on-the-job training, but ideally I'm going to give people resources so that if they need to do something, they can very quickly look at the process flow, say, oh yeah, I'm right here. Because this person has this kind of injury or illness, they need to fill out this form or do this. So.
Okay, and I think that's great, and I think that's kind of the when to do it and why to do it. And then there's one last question here from Sharon. I think it might be shared by a few folks too. Is again a quick clarification. Sharon's asking, are there tools other than Salesforce that make this easier to do? So I think people are now probably convinced in your argument is that there's a place for this and it should be done. But the question is kind of how and where to look for the right tools to do this. So just a really quick.
Sure.
And again, I know we could follow up, Sharon, and anybody else that's asking that question, you can follow up directly with John through info@thoughtrock.net or contact John directly. But John, just a quick comment on the tools and the options for people?
Sure. So yeah, just to clarify, Salesforce I'm using just as an example of an application actually. So you wouldn't likely do this with Salesforce at all. There are a number of different providers out there if you sort of look at performance support solutions, or sometimes they do refer to themselves as knowledge management, although there's a slight difference. And there is some element of this in document management systems. So from a category perspective, I think that's where you want to look. And there are a number of tools out there that will allow you to do this. So basically what you're looking for is a tool that will allow you to take the content you've collected, store it and format it centrally, and then make it available either by publishing it in documents or potentially in an e-learning format, or in a participant guide for a class, but also make it accessible on demand in an easy way. And those are the kind of tools you want. If anyone want to call me, I can talk about the the different ones that we know. We try not to do sales pitches in these presentations, so I won't go into specific vendors. But
yeah, I was just going to say that's a great idea, and I think people would be interested to know. I mean, with the 10 plus years of doing this, and kind of you've vetted a lot of the technology and tools that are out there. So I think if you want to contact John directly, he can give you some examples and even a demonstration of what tools the MindMuse team is actually using. They're all third-party tools, but the ones that John has selected is probably the best options and the stuff that's working the best for customers that we know of. So anybody that wants to reach out directly and get more specifics on some of those tools, John will be more than happy to answer those questions for you. Last question, John. On the top of that, best way to help this might be a comment from somebody. Best way to help desk is providing them with more access to critical applications in order to avoid unnecessary escalations for things help desk can simply resolve. I guess that's a comment. And I think that's in line with what you're saying here, right, is being able to provide the tools to the help desk and be able to answer those questions, and the training's there kind of just in time for the help desk analyst as well. This is,
yeah,
I think it's important that this isn't just about providing end user training. This is about also, for larger help desks or for smaller help desks, the ability to also get help desk analysts up to speed quicker on the variety of applications and processes and everything they need to know to be able to support the customer.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very useful tools for the analysts, and the beauty of that is as we talked about in that one diagram, that the service desk is actually helping to maintain and modify and update that content so that their colleagues all have access to the relevant information. If you think about it from a best practice perspective, it can be integrated into your knowledge management practices from the service desk perspective.
Great. And from what, again, John, from any tools that you might recommend from what you've seen for someone to get started even at the help desk analyst training level or just that basic end user level, from your perspective, the getting started kind of project is not that overly complicated and actually fairly straightforward with the right tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as with anything, right, don't try to boil the ocean. So select a tool, do a pilot, gather the content, and work on the various ways that it can be delivered and used internally from the service desk perspective, and then maybe try that with a select user group, or just application-driven kind of a select slice of your clientele, and do some metrics, right? So take some calls that if you analyze your call volumes and say, hey, here's a bunch of calls that are consistently coming in and they're knowledge related, let's see if we can use this application to drive that down.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you again, everyone who did provide the questions, and thanks for everyone for participating today. John, thanks a lot, and I think there'll probably be a few people that'll reach out to you directly, and again, please feel free to do that. If you if you can't get through to John directly, just go through the email on the screen there, info@thoughtrock.net, and we'll make sure that the emails get forwarded to John directly, and any specifics around tools or even samples of how to execute on some of this, John can talk more directly about that offline, so we appreciate that.